The end of the 15th and the beginning of the 16th century are marked by a number of changes that are to give the world a completely different outlook. In education and science, scholars focus on the new humanist values. Columbus and his colleagues make the globe significantly bigger, while Copernicus removes it from its central position in the universe. In Spain, the Catholic kings drive out the Jews and the Moors, and in the rest of Europe, the Reformation takes root. One man experiences all these changes at first hand: Nicolaes Cleynaerts, today an illustrious stranger, but in the 16th century, a highly respected humanist, theologian, Arabic scholar, and authority on Islam. There is a statue of Cleynaerts on the market square in Diest, where he was born in 1493. He was the eldest son of Peter Cleynaerts, also known as Baker. That second name is quite important, since Master Klaas continues to use it into his 30s. In 1512, he enrolls at the University of Leuven as Nicolaes de Bekker de Diest. Most new first-year students stay in a pedagogie, a kind of boarding house for students, where they also take lessons. Leuven has 4 of them: the Lily, the Falcon, the Castle, and the Pig at Waken, where Cleynaerts lives. He's studying for Magister Artium, which means Master in the Artes Liberales, the 7 arts that are meant to turn a student into a free spirit. After 3 years, Klaas earns his master's degree. He continues to live in Het Waken, where he teaches young students and starts his study of theology, which will take 12 years. His personal mentor is Jacobus Latomus, a conservative theologian who is to play an important role in the conflict over the Drie Talen College, the 3 languages college. The establishment of this college was encouraged by Erasmus, who wanted to breathe new life into the study of Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. According to the scholar from Rotterdam, a good theologian has to achieve perfect mastery of these 3 languages. But the professors in Leuven know only medieval Latin, and they have only the faintest notion of Greek and Hebrew. So they strongly oppose the college's establishment by organizing demonstrations, delivering fire and brimstone sermons, and orchestrating intimidation. But the spirit of the time prevails. In 1520, the college secures the right to exist on a permanent footing. Meanwhile, those scholarly gentlemen denounce Luther as a heretic in 1519, and then direct their efforts to purifying the Christian faith. The first book burning, attended by the future Charles V, takes place in the market square of Leuven. 2 years later, the first heretics are burned in Brussels. In 1520, the university appoints Master Klaas as supervisor of the Beguinage of Diest. He'll succeed the priest in charge after his death. He secures another appointment in 1521, becoming president of the College of Houtelay, an institution where 4 needy theology students are given a room and full board, and Master Klaas becomes their supervisor. In his new position, he fully embraces humanist values. He starts to study Greek and Hebrew, even though his colleagues keep telling him that he's debasing himself as a theologian by using the Greek alphabet. When in 1524 the priest in charge of the Béguinage of Diest dies, Cleynaerts is expected to succeed him. But an opposing candidate challenges his appointment and makes an appeal to the ecclesiastical court of Liège. This is the start of a lengthy court battle. But for the time being, Claes has enough to do. He starts teaching Greek and Hebrew, and then out of the blue the famous Psalter of Nebbio, which contains the Psalms in 5 different languages, falls into his hands. Cleynaerts can read all the columns except for one, the column with the Arabic symbols. He has to use all his creative powers to decipher the Arabic alphabet. For the most part he succeeds, except for the vowels. In 1527, Master Claes is finally awarded his master's degree in theology. This is the start of a busy period. First, he has some books printed for the benefit of his students. The first one, a Hebrew grammar, is edited in 1529 by the famous Dirk Martens. In addition, he publishes 6 dialogues of Chrysostom, a Greek text edition, published by his friend Rescius. In the meantime, he applies for the position of plebeian of St. Peter's Church in Leuven, but he fails to be elected by only 1 vote. The Greek grammar that is to make Cleynaerts' name known throughout Europe is published in April 1530. In just 1 year, 4,000 copies of the book are sold, and more than 500 reprints are produced by 1700. It is a tremendous bestseller. Cleynaerts is invited to teach in Paris, and this trip becomes a memorable experience. He teaches a large audience, and in a short time he sells all the books he's brought with him, 300 Hebrew and 500 Greek grammars. His reputation as a teacher is firmly established. Back in Leuven in the spring of 1531, he generates another original idea. A little book that will make professors of Greek redundant. The Meditationes Graecanicae makes it possible for amateurs to study Greek on their own. But suddenly, his life takes a completely different turn. In Leuven, at the beginning of October, he meets Don Hernando Colon, the son of Christopher Columbus. Colon is searching for valuable books in the region to furnish his new library in Seville. He'd like to take a specialist and advisor with him to Spain. It proves very easy to convince Master Claes, who signs a 3-year contract. He's allowed to take a friend with him, and that friend is Johannes Vesaius from Bruges, one of Cleynaerts' students. Within a few days, Cleynaerts is on his way to Spain. It is the first time in his life that Claes has travelled on horseback, as he soon finds out to his cost. In fact, Colon should have taken a doctor with him, because, as he writes, it was a real catastrophe, as much for the upper part of the horse as for his own lower part. The journey was to take the old pilgrimage route to Compostela, Camargue, Paris, Tours, Aquitaine, Vitoria, Burgos, and all within the space of a month. In Salamanca, Colon decides to rest up for a while. However, the local authorities are so pleased with Cleynaerts' presence there that they ask Colon if it's possible to release him from his contract. At first, the nobleman is doubtful, but eventually he agrees. So he sets off for Seville on his own. Klaas feels very much at home in this old university town, even more so after his meeting with Hernan Núñez, a professor who'd studied Arabic in his youth. Thanks to his help, Cleynaerts finally masters his Arabic vowels. He publishes another book in 1533, the Latin text of Livy's Book 1 of the Ab Urbe Condita. He sends a copy of it to Colon, and that same copy is still on the shelves of the Biblioteca Colombina in Seville to this day. On the last page, Colon wrote in Latin, "Nicolaes Cleynaerts sent me this book in 1534. In November, Cleynaerts secures a permanent appointment at the university. But he has only just taken up this position when he gets an offer from the Portuguese court. John III summons Master Klaas to Portugal for 5 years to take care of the education of Prince Henry, his younger brother. The substantial fee will continue to be paid after the 5 years, for as long as the prince lives. Master Klaas does not need much time to consider this offer. From 1534 until 1537, he's at the court in Évora. Since the education of the young prince only requires 1 hour a day, Klaas has more than enough time to study local customs, of which he gives an hilarious account in his letters. For the first time, he tries to teach Latin to a little boy who had no common language with him. This succeeds so long as he keeps on repeating the short Latin sentences used in everyday life, until the boy is completely at ease with them. He buys 3 young black slaves, a common practice in Portugal. At first, he doesn't know how to communicate with them. He then teaches them Latin with his unique conversation method. This seems to be very successful, because he confidently reflects on the possibility of turning his young black slaves into theologians. He even finds time for Arabic. He reads the medical canon from Ibn Sina, also known as Avicenna. In July 1537, Prince Henry, who is also the Archbishop of Braga, leaves for his diocese, and Cleynaerts follows him. He's given permission to try out to his heart's content his recently developed conversation method in a new Latin college. Also in Braga, he draws up a Latin grammar, although this is not very successful. In November 1538, Cleynaerts decides to return home. But first he wants to get hold of an Arabic master in Spain who's willing to follow him to Brabant as a kind of living grammar. His search takes him from Coimbra, Évora and Seville to Granada, where he finds accommodation in the Alhambra, Governor Luis de Mendoza's residence. When the governor hears of Cleynaerts' plans, he has a Moorish slave brought from Almeria, a certain Karuf, who is a competent master and a gifted intellectual, and helps Klaas perfect his knowledge of Arabic. Cleynaerts begins to read the Quran and immerses himself in the mysteries of Muslim theology. It is in these months that the dream of his life takes shape, a peaceful crusade against Islam. Master Klaas thinks that the Muslims, when they're addressed in their own language, are more likely to rectify their erroneous interpretation of the Bible. Therefore, he plans to establish a school in Leuven where young priests can study the Arabic language before they leave for the Barbary coast, the land of the Berbers. But first, he wants to go to Africa himself to get to know the ways of the Muslims at home. On the 10th of April 1540, he crosses the Strait of Gibraltar. His route goes through Ceuta, Tetuan, and the gorge of Bab Taza to Fez, which is the spiritual center of Islam in North Africa. After a favorable meeting with the Sultan, he's housed in the Milla, an enclosed part of the town, where the Jews have a certain degree of freedom. Cleynaerts feels safer there than in the Arab Medina, where the Fassi, the inhabitants of Fez, seem rather hostile. In the ghetto, he sets about writing an autobiography. Meanwhile, he's involved in a bitter conflict with the so-called monster, a person whom Cleynaerts never names, but who was probably Sebastião de Vargas, the Portuguese delegate in Fez. In a letter dated the 9th of April 1541, Cleynaerts complains about this man. For a whole year he'd been thwarting his peaceful crusade and placing him in mortal danger. The situation worsens when the Portuguese court suddenly stops its payments to Cleynaerts. Master Klaas sends his servant to Évora to collect the fees in person, but his man returns from the journey empty-handed. As the result of a series of intrigues, Klaas falls into disgrace with Prince Henry. He has to leave Fez, penniless and disappointed. And one disaster is followed by another. Within sight of the port of Azilá, Klaas is thrown from his horse and sustains a fracture of the collarbone. It's a month before he's able to continue his trip. He first travels to Cadiz, then back to Granada. There he writes a letter to Charles V, asking for his support for his peaceful crusade. A reply from the court is not forthcoming. In a last letter, he tells his Portuguese friend Joannes Pavus that he will once again leave for Fez in a few days' time. But this never happened. On the 5th of November 1542, Nicolaes Cleynaerts died. The cause of his death is unknown. The unfortunate man from Diest was buried within the walls of the Alhambra and was forgotten by history.